All right, so let's rewind the clock, like way back. Imagine it's the year 2000. You're reading like a tech magazine,
Right?
right? Who's on the cover? Like, who is the hottest company in the world?
Oh, man, 2000.
It's not Apple. It's not Google.
No.
It's Intel.
It's Intel. Yeah. It really is like a different world if you think back then.
It's wild to think about, right?
Totally. They were,
Sure.
I mean, basically the heart of the PC revolution, like pretty much every computer was running on Intel chips.
Yeah, they were the undisputed champions, but like something happened along the way.
Right.
And today we're taking a deep dive into Intel's decline, how this tech titan went from ruling the world to, well, facing some pretty tough times.
Yeah. It is. It's a fascinating story. It's a story of missed opportunities and, I don't know, maybe a little bit of hubris too. Like they fumbled not one, but two major technological shifts.
All right, so first things first, let's paint a picture of Intel at their peak. Think late 90s, early 200s.
Yeah.
They were the E-name in computing. Their stock was soaring. They were on the Dow Jones. And their legendary CEO, Andy Grove, was preaching the gospel of only the paranoid survive.
Yeah, Grove had this vision of the PC being like the center of everything we do, work, play, communication, everything. And for a while, it seemed like he was absolutely right. Like their stock hit an all-time high in August of 2000. I mean, they were on top of the world.
But then the first warning signs started to appear, right? The mobile revolution was kicking off, and Intel seemed to well miss the memo.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The iPhone launches 2007 game changer, right? And who's powering it? Not Intel. Apple went with this then small company, ARM, for their chips.
So Intel, the king of chips, gets snubbed for this newcomer.
Right.
Did they just completely underestimate the power of mobile devices?
It's hard to say for sure, but there's no doubt that they didn't see the mobile wave coming with the same clarity as, say, Apple or even their rivals like AMD. You know, they were so focused on this PC-centric vision that they kind of missed the boat. And it wasn't just about phones. It was about this entire shift towards mobile computing.
And that miscalculation had a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't just that they were missing out on the mobile market. It started impacting their core PC business, too.
Oh, absolutely. As ARM technology improved, it wasn't just phones anymore. Apple started using ARM in some of their laptops, and while others followed suit. Suddenly, even in the PC space, Intel was facing serious competition.
Add to that, competitors like AMD were gaining ground. They were anticipating trends like cloud computing, a market Intel was also a little slow to react to. So all of a sudden, Intel's dominance was starting to look a lot less certain.
It's almost like they were playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. You know, they were making moves, but they weren't looking far enough ahead.
And on top of all of this, they were starting to struggle with keeping up with this breakneck pace of innovation in the chip industry itself.
Right. We have to talk about Moore's Law here. For decades, Intel was practically synonymous with Moore's Law, doubling the number of transistors on a chip every 2 years. It was like a mantra for the entire industry.
But by the late 2010s, they were having trouble keeping up. Remember that public apology in 2019 for chip shortages and delays? Not exactly a great look for a company that prided itself on being at the forefront of technology.
No, it was definitely a wake-up call. They were struggling to maintain their technological edge and keep pace with this relentless drive for more power and efficiency.
So by the time Pat Gelsinger returned to Intel as CEO in 2021, the company was already in a pretty precarious position. Their stock was down, they were losing market share, and they had missed the boat on mobile. Talk about a challenge.
It's interesting because Gelsinger was coming back to a company that was a shadow of its former self. And we're not talking about a minor dip here. Their stock was down a massive 68% from its peak. They'd even been bumped from the Dow Jones. And guess who replaced them?
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
NVIDIA, which, as we'll discuss, plays a huge role in this second big wave that Intel missed.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about Gelsinger's attempts to turn things around. He came in with this big focus on revitalizing Intel's manufacturing capabilities, getting them back to the forefront of chip production. Was that the right move?
Well, it was definitely a necessary move. They had fallen behind in terms of manufacturing technology, and Gelsinger recognized that. But as we'll see, while he was focused on playing catch-up in one area, another massive tech wave was building the AI boom.
And wouldn't you know it, NVIDIA, the company that replaced Intel on the Dow, was perfectly positioned to ride that wave.
Right.
Almost poetic, isn't it?
It really is. We'll dig into that more in a bit. But the point is, Intel was once again about to find themselves on the outside looking in, playing catch-up in a rapidly changing tech landscape.
So we've got Gelsinger coming in, trying to fix Intel's manufacturing issues. But at the same time, this whole AI thing is exploding. Talk about bad timing.
It really was, you know? It was a case of whack-a-mole for Intel. Just as they were tackling one problem, another even bigger one was popping up.
Yeah, let's dive into that AI boom a bit. It feels like AI went from science fiction to, well, everywhere in the blink of an eye. And suddenly this company, NVIDIA, which most people associated with gaming graphics cards, was the hottest name in tech.
Yeah, what's fascinating is how NVIDIA, a company that was originally focused on such a niche market, gamers, found themselves at the center of one of the biggest technological revolutions in decades. Their GPUs, those graphics cards, turned out to be so incredibly good at handling the massive data processing demands of artificial intelligence.
So it's not just that Intel missed the boat on AI. It's that a company they probably saw as like a minor player ended up being the perfect fit for this new world.
Exactly. And this time, they weren't just a little behind, they were miles behind. NVIDIA was powering self-driving cars, medical breakthroughs, all sorts of cutting-edge AI applications.
I remember reading that NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang basically said that Intel had this massive opportunity and they just funneled it.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly shy about pointing out Intel's misstep, and he had a point. The AI revolution was happening at an incredible pace, and Intel, despite all their resources and talent, simply weren't ready for it.
Yeah. So they're struggling to keep up with Moore's Law. They've missed out on mobile, and now they're lagging behind in AI. It's like a perfect storm of challenges. What was Gelsinger's plan to deal with all of this? Did he just throw his hands up and say, well, we're doomed?
Not exactly. He had this bold and some might say risky idea to double down on Intel's manufacturing capabilities, but with a twist.
Okay, let's talk about this gamble, because it seems like a pretty big shift in strategy. Intel has always been known for designing A&D, manufacturing their own chips.
Right. They had these giant cutting-edge factories called foundries where they made their processors. It was a huge part of their identity. But Gelsinger decided to open up those foundries to other companies.
So instead of just making their own chips, they were going to become like a high-tech factory for anyone who needed chips made.
Exactly. He wanted Intel to become a major player in the foundry market, competing with the likes of TSMC, the world's largest contract chip maker.
Hold on. So Intel, a company that's struggling to keep up in some key areas,
Yeah.
is going to start making chips for their competitors. Didn't that seem a bit counterintuitive?
It definitely raised some eyebrows, but there were a few reasons behind this move. First, Gelsinger saw it as a way to generate much-needed revenue. By using their existing factories to make chips for other companies, they could potentially offset some of the losses they were incurring in their own product lines.
So it was partly a financial play,
Yeah.
but there was also this bigger geopolitical context at play, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember, this was happening in the midst of the global chip shortage. The U.S. government was pushing hard to boost domestic chip production and reduce reliance on foreign manufacturers, especially in light of rising tensions with China.
Enter the Chip PS Act, which pumped billions of dollars into the U.S. semiconductor industry.
Exactly. And Intel, with its existing infrastructure and expertise, was seen as a key player in this effort to bring chip manufacturing back to America by expanding their foundry business. They could attract more chip design companies to the U.S., creating jobs and bolstering the country's technological competitiveness.
So Gelsinger's gamble was partly about survival, partly about national interest. But did it work? Is Intel's foundry business thriving?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The reality is that Intel's foray into the foundry business has been a bit of a mixed bag. They've faced delays, technical challenges, and stiff competition from established players like TSMC. It's a tough market to crack, and it requires massive investments and a very specific set of skills.
And let's not forget the geopolitical wildcard TSMC is based in Taiwan, which faces increasing tensions with China. It's got to be making some companies nervous about relying too heavily on them.
Absolutely. And that's where Intel's location in the U.S. could be a major advantage. If those tensions escalate, companies might see Intel as a safer, more stable alternative. But for now, the future of Intel's foundry business is still uncertain.
So on top of their existing challenges in the PC and server markets, their lag behind NVIDIA and AI, they're also trying to navigate this complex and risky new venture in the foundry business. Gelsinger certainly didn't inherit an easy job.
He really didn't. And to make things even more complicated, Gelsinger himself is no longer at the helm. His departure as CEO adds another layer of uncertainty to Intel's future.
Wow, talk about a cliffhanger. So we've got Intel at a crossroads, facing competition, technological disruption, internal challenges, A&D a change in leadership. What happens next? Do they manage to pull themselves out of this nosedive, or is this the beginning of the end for Intel?
Well, we've got some potential scenarios to explore. We can dig into the possibility of acquisitions, spin-offs, asset sales, and even what a world without a dominant Intel might look like.
Okay, so we've covered Intel's rise, their stumbles, and their big bet on becoming a chip-making factory for other companies. But the big question remains, what happens to Intel now?
Well, let's play out some possible futures.
Well,
One scenario that's been whispered about is an acquisition. Could another tech giant swoop in and just gobble up Intel?
there have been rumors about Qualcomm, right, a powerhouse in mobile chips. If they merged with Intel, they'd have a huge presence in PCs and servers too. Talk about a shakeup.
Yeah, it would be a seismic shift in the industry. But there are other possibilities. What if Intel decided to spin off their foundry business? They could focus on designing their own chips again and let the foundry operate as a separate company.
That makes sense. But didn't we say that Chip PS Act funding is tied to Intel keeping control of the foundry? A full spin-off might not even be an option.
You're right. The CHIPS Act adds like another layer of complexity, and then there's the option of selling off some assets. Maybe they streamline their operations, get rid of some things that aren't really working, and focus on what they do best.
It almost feels like Intel is holding a yard sale of its future, trying to figure out what stays and what goes. But what's interesting is that even if some of these scenarios play out, it doesn't mean the end of Intel altogether.
Exactly. Intel still has a ton of expertise, a massive infrastructure, and a very valuable brand name. Even if they're not the dominant force they once were, they could still play a significant role in the tech world.
But it's a very different role than what they imagined back in their glory days, right? They wanted to be the center of the universe, the company that powered everything. Now they're fighting to stay relevant in a landscape that shifted dramatically beneath their feet.
Yeah, it's almost Shakespearean, this fall from grace. It makes you wonder, what could they have done differently? Were there warning signs they ignored?
I keep coming back to Andy Grove's. Only the paranoid survive? Was Intel at its core not paranoid enough? Did their past success blind them to the changes that were happening around them?
It's easy to say that in hindsight, but there's something to be said for that idea of constant vigilance, of never assuming your position is secure. The tech world is ruthless, and as we've seen, even giants can stumble.
It's not just about companies, is it? It's about all of us.
Yeah.
In our careers, our lives, things change so fast. What are we doing to stay ahead of the curve? What are we ignoring at our own peril?
Those are the questions that Intel's story should make all of us ask. It's a reminder that no matter how successful you are, no matter how much you think you know, the world can change in an instant. And the ability to adapt, to learn to pivot, is what separates those who thrive from those who get left behind.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Intel's decline, I'm left with this feeling of, well, a little bit of unease. It's
Yeah.
a cautionary tale, but it's also a story that's still being written. What happens to Intel next? And what lessons can we as individuals and as a society take away from their journey?
Intel's fate is still uncertain, but the bigger picture is clear. The tech landscape is constantly evolving. We need to be adaptable, curious, and maybe just a little bit paranoid to navigate it successfully. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and never stop exploring.